Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Welcome to Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Earth Hour 2024 is coming, and it's going to be the biggest hour for Earth of the year. It takes place on March 23rd, so coming up just in a few days. And since it was launched by the World Wildlife Foundation in 2007, Earth Hour has symbolized a commitment to the planet through the simple act of turning off the lights for 1 hour, and often on some of the largest tourist attractions in the world, like the Sydney Opera House or Big Ben, and they go dark for an hour. However, despite all of its noble intentions, awareness of the movement has been limited, with only about 52% of the global population being aware of the event. Our guests today are Phil-Wilce and Antonia Simon, who are Creative Director for Europe and Senior Experience Consultant, respectively, for EPAM Continuum, which is a research and strategy firm that worked with the World Wildlife Foundation to reinvigorate the campaign and the outreach efforts on behalf of Earth Hour about the climate crisis as it becomes more pronounced. The project represents an opportunity to explore how to tell stories about the environment and humanity's impact on nature, something that I know everyone listening to Sustainability in Your Ear thinks about in your work and in your life. The project's cornerstone was the identification of a new target audience labeled the inactive middle. And that's characterized not by demographics, but by a lack of action driven by eco-anxiety and eco-fatigue. In other words, all the bad news is overwhelming these folks. EPAM's strategy focused on transforming Earth Hour from a singular event into a gateway for nature-positive action, potentially that can continue all year long. And a significant portion of the redesign was the introduction of the biggest hour for Earth message as a key idea. Some of the interesting new activities happening around Earth Hour in 2024 include an in-world Fortnite gaming experience built to bring young people to the program. So there's a lot to unpack here. And you can learn more about Earth Hour at earthhour.org. Earth Hour is all one word, no space, no dash, earthhour.org. And about EPAM at epam.com. That's E-P-A-M, epam.com. We'll get to the conversation in a moment, right after this commercial break. Welcome to the show, Antonia and Phil. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Mitch. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Mitch, for having us. Really excited to be here today.
Tell us where you're calling from, because I know EPAM is a global organization.
You're calling us from London. So yeah, small world, but big planet. And yeah, nice to join up like this.
Let me start with you, Antonia. Can you tell us a little about Earth Hour's history and mission?
Absolutely. So Earth Hour began in 2007, and it has, been recognized for turning off lights for landmarks from, Sydney Opera House to the Eiffel Tower to London's Big Ben. And the kind of mission behind Earth Hour is really driving awareness and kind of a call to action towards really addressing some of our Earth's critical climate issues. And it's grown into becoming the world's largest grassroots movement.
Now, I've had EPAM on the show talking about various aspects of your consumer surveying over the past few years. What motivated EPAM to take on the Earth Hour redesign project, and how did it align with your own corporate social responsibility goals?
I'll just rewind to give you a bit of context. As the brainchild of WWF, the World Wildlife Foundation, Earth Hour, as Antonia said, sort of, they recognized the fundamental success that it had around the planet. More than 15 years then, since its inception, we're getting to a tipping point with our climate and nature crisis. They're recognizing that we're putting at risk the fate of our one and only home, Earth, and all of our futures as well. And with us being on course to breach the 2030 1.5 degree global temperature increase set by the Climate Paris Agreement, and nature, the source of our livelihoods and one of our biggest allies in the climate crisis, also being under threat, they knew that the next few years are crucial to all of our futures. So we need to all take action, and WWF understood this. That means that individuals, communities, businesses, and governments must all urgently step up their efforts to protect and restore our shared home. So with 2030 goal in mind, WWF knew that they must step things up too. And they wanted to bring new life into Earth Hour and the brand and the work and the message and the mission. And that's when we heard about this opportunity. So as EPAM, we grabbed this with both hands and we pitched for this business in a highly competitive market, but we pitched in it because we knew this was too good an opportunity to miss. It was the opportunity to reinvigorate the Earth Hour brand and the experience in 2023, something that is very close to our hearts as individuals, plus as an organization, as EPAM, as well, as we endeavor to have a strategic and creative and the technological skills that we have as an organization to put that into action, and combine that with our global presence, as you rightly said in your introduction, and our brand and digital expertise. We put together a highly competitive argument and concept that captured the imagination of WWF, and then we started to collaborate.
Now, you identified as part of your initial research a wide swath of the population that you describe as the inactive middle, and that's your new target audience for Earth Hour. Who are they? What do they feel about the state of the world, and how do you determine that they were the right audience for Earth Hour at this time, given the state of the climate crisis?
So I think if we have climate activists on one end of the spectrum and climate skeptics on the other, the inactive middle really represent that huge cohort of individuals that lie in between. And this meant that, they acknowledge the pressing issues impacting our our Earth, but they don't know exactly what to do. And we uncovered this audience after surveying around 1,000 global participants. And we found that while a lot of the individuals, recognize this dire state that our Earth is in, they don't know really what personally they can do to make a change. So specifically, 46% would be inspired to do something, if they knew what action to take. And I think through our survey and additional research, we began to understand that this inactive middle are really overwhelmed by eco-anxiety, and this kind of perpetuates the feeling of really not having a lot of clarity on what they can do to make a personal difference. And I think one interesting point about this group is that they don't fall into one specific demographic. They represent this really global mindset that ranges in age, gender, residence, socioeconomic status. And so what this told us is that, we have a lot of stereotypes that we attach to the climate crisis, whether it be, passionate activists or passionate skeptics or non-believers. And we saw that this was kind of an overlooked group of individuals that really don't fall into a specific demographic group, but they do share this common mindset around inaction. And so we knew that, in order to really create the reach that WWF wanted for Earth Hour and reach that, 2030 nature positive goal, we really needed to think about how to activate this overlooked group and give them the tools for action to really move the needle.
That's a really interesting approach to this, because as you describe, it's the passionate skeptics, the deniers, and the passionate supporters of these ideas that get all the coverage. And so
Absolutely.
there's a very polarized view of this, even though the vast majority of people on the planet recognize this is happening. How did you redesign the Earth Hour experience in order to engage those people who want to look past their frustration, anxiety, and the sense of gloom and doom to do something? What were the key, and Phil, let me direct this to you as the creative director, what were the key elements of the redesign in order to accomplish that engagement?
So we took a consumer-focused approach to this because, we understand that consumers, to create solutions that change their habits, the principle of human-centered design really is how you're going to help people change that. And that's the same if you're introducing products or you're trying to shift any sorts of behavior. By doing this, your solution is most likely to have the desired effect. So for Earth Hour, we knew that we needed to understand the inactive middle in order to mobilize them into action. So yes, they're neither activists or skeptics, but they are overwhelmed by the stories of extreme weather events and forecast reports and eco fatigue. And it was important, thing to mention that the inactive middle represent that global mindset. So when we're looking at approaching those people and understanding and appealing to the majority of them, we're also taking into consideration the Earth Hour brand itself. And the Earth Hour brand itself, there's a great expression. They see themselves as a street party rather than a street protest. So it's about a very positive outlook, and it's a celebration of the world. So while you've got that fatigue and negative impact of the news and the environmental considerations around it, looking at the positive elements, celebrating the planet, all the good that it does for us, and trying to activate them in that place. And from a creative point of view, that played through in our messaging, in our campaign that we created to celebrate the biggest hour on Earth, to be a rallying cry that was translatable in multiple different languages, that was understood in every corner of the planet, that used imagery where people were dancing through rivers and in the rain, and a much more positive outlook, as opposed to the constant the doom and gloom, which is not a motivating factor for anything, let alone when you're talking about something as crucial and vital as this.
Now, human-centered design really requires that you get engaged with all of the relevant stakeholders. How did you do that for something as global as Earth Hour?
Absolutely. Well, it was a difficult process, and we were very grateful for Teams and virtual meetings during that process. But key to making sure that we were bringing kind of human-centered design into our engagement model was ensuring that we were really engaging with a lot of the different stakeholders across WWF's locations. So we worked with, the Earth Hour team very closely to identify 25 different WWF stakeholders around the globe to really be involved in the vision and strategy development. So this involved, speaking to everyone from fundraising manager in Delhi to the communications officer in Uganda to the head of comms in Mexico. And what we did is we brought them into sessions like workshops and co-creation sessions for our vision, campaign ideation, funding model opportunities, to really understand, how some of the ideas that we were coming up with would work, not only at a global scale, but also specifically in their locations. And I think this was a key part of our strategy, is ensuring that specifically the local offices were able to really run with the campaign on the ground and execute the strategy and priorities that they have in their localities.
So to address their local culture, but following this overarching mission and plan. So how did Earth Hour change as a result of the work you did?
It's a really important point. I'm glad you asked the question, Mitch, because we knew that to talk to all these audiences that Antonia's referencing here, it needs to be eminently accessible. It needs to be translatable. It needs to be understood. And Earth Hour in the previous, since 2007, had evolved organically and beautifully, but part of its success in the way it had sprouted up and had different meanings in different parts of the world. We wanted the brand to be united and to have a single message, a single identity, a single tone of voice. So in order to do that, we looked at every element of the brand, every single touch point, and that includes everything right back to the logo. So we looked at the logo, which was recognizable around the planet, but had some elements of confusion around what its messaging was. So we looked at the number 60. That was the Earth Hour logo, but we looked to simplify it, and we looked to integrate it to speak to the Earth, so people would recognize their place in it and what the 60 represented. So the 60 represents the 60 minutes, the hour, and the thinking being that us in our thinking to simplify that 60 highlights the Earth Hour's renewed purpose and energy, and that new brand identity and tone of voice sort of really works within the parameters of a globally recognized and respected trademark, but unites it. And so we saw the results as being like powerfully simple. We introduced a flip clock motif into it, and you'll see that across social channels and other channels at the moment. They're starting to come out and be reused again. So it aligns the brand closer to the concept of time and urgency that we talked about earlier in this deadline of reaching 2030. And so the evolution, because that's how we see it as being very much, is an evolution, retains the integrity of the original brand and the original messaging, but brings new clarity and purpose and ownership to all of those audiences that Antonia referenced before. So they feel like they can take ownership of it, and they're empowered to work with it, and really catalyze the tangible impacts from the ground up.
I like the emphasis on 60 and the notion of the flip count, because it engages you with the fact that you are in the midst of something rather than simply observing an event taking place, that you're participating in and you have this sense of time. Since it's a 24-hour event at different times of the world, I mean, you can't turn off the lights all at once. How do you activate that local engagement to say it's at 10 a.m. our time, for instance?
It's a really good question, and one that we had to get our heads around quite a lot when you're laying the platforms and the foundations for a global campaign that's based around an hour that at 8 p.m. different for us in London to you on the West Coast, of course. How does that resonate? But you can also use that to greater impact, because then your Earth hour lasts longer than the day, and you can almost see it moving around the planet, and we follow it around the planet, much in the way people might do New Year's Eve, when you can see that happening all around the planet. But vitally, to your point about switching off the lights, it was important that this became much bigger than that. And while we saw participation, that type of participation, we wanted to open it up and for it to have more impact beyond the hour. So yes, the focus was on those crucial 60 minutes, but we wanted this to resonate. And so we wanted to invite the world to switch off where they switched off their lights, but in this instance, we were flipping it so that we wanted to switch off from distractions, to give an hour for Earth, and to bank as many planet positive pledges, which is what we asked of people, to make a positive impact, to do anything, to watch a podcast, to learn, to understand, to do a beach clean, to plant trees, anything. So the hour was our catalyst and it was our moment, but it wasn't the sole time that you could participate in Earth Hour.
I think this is a great foundation for continuing the discussion and digging into some of the specifics as well as the impact that it's had. But we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. Now let's get back to the conversation with Wilce and Antonia Simon of EPAM Continuum, a research and strategy firm that worked with the World Wildlife Foundation on the redesign of the Earth Hour experience. Antonia, as we come back, do you have data that suggests that people are engaging with Earth Hour differently than they did in the past?
Yeah, the data that is coming back has been really, really encouraging. So in the last year, so for the 2023 campaign, people around the world pledged a total of 410,000 hours to nature positive activities. So this ranged from, maybe taking that hour to watch a documentary about biodiversity, to doing a beach cleanup, to maybe even changing their shower head to, eco-friendly shower head. So each different geography has recorded the number of hours that have been pledged to different nature positive activities. And so it's been really meaningful to be able to document that kind of data and record not only what that means at a global scale, but also specifically in different countries.
Now, do you all use some of that recorded activity to also do further marketing of Earth Hour during the course of the year that follows?
So that hasn't been something that we've been directly involved in, but I know that has been a key element of the campaign this year. I know that they're really looking at using that data as that foundation to build upon in order to reach their 2030 nature positive goal.
Now, a large element of the new design included some digital experiences like Fortnite creating an event around Earth Hour. And of course, digital experiences generate emissions through their consumption of electricity. I'm wondering if you had explored even the idea of having those experiences go dark for an hour as an expression of their support for Earth Hour.
Yes, so I think Fortnite presented us with a really exciting opportunity and catalyst to future digital engagements. I think it was a really good starting point for Earth Hour to show that they were hungry and eager for this kind of experience. And I think what's really meaningful with digital experiences that we're able to kind of tap into new audiences that Earth Hour might not have engaged in the past, because turning off your lights is quite a physical activity. Exploring what that could look like in a digital realm is, I think, a really exciting opportunity that they are going to continue to explore. There is an element to consider in terms of the difference in storytelling also that digital experiences can provide. I think, gaming specifically is a really unique medium for climate awareness because of its immersive nature. And it really brings home climate issues in a way that films and maybe other media cannot. So that was one of the really interesting ways that we were looking at kind of changing Earth Hour from being something that was experienced in the physical world to the digital world.
So, Phil, I wanted to ask you, as the creative director working on this project, about what you learned from EPAM's surveying of consumers over the past couple of years about their sense of engagement with sustainability and the prospects for constructive change, because there's an active debate about the need to focus on solutions rather than just the crisis. What did you all learn from that, and how did you apply it to the Earth Hour project?
I think one of the reasons why the campaign was a success with those great numbers that we achieved was because of the research and understanding that we did to really understand the audience, where their mindset was, how they felt around the world, and we really did explore every part of the world to try and unite that. And I think then, creating that imagery and that language, that uplifting, positive model that we built as our platform, to create that relatable material by having an adaptable idea that could be turned into many different things in different locations, really giving people their own sense of ownership. It's not a broadcast message. It's inviting people in to partake in something together. And yet they're feeling part of something bigger, uniting people in the way that this was an endeavor, whether they were doing that in their local park with their local communities. They felt that they were part of something big, much as in the same way that the switch the lights off motif did, because you could see that happening on landmarks around the world. So when you're doing it in your apartment at home, you feel like you're a part of something bigger. So we were building on everything that we learned and everything Earth Hour had learned over the past decade and a half, and pulling that together to make sure everybody felt like they were pulling in the same direction at once.
So what principles would you share from this design experience with companies and organizations that want to have a constructive conversation with customers through social media or other forms of digital engagement about how to reduce humanity's environmental impact?
I think the main outtakes that we learned in the project, and it very much was a learning endeavor, because it was very different. It's very exciting, but very challenging in that respect. Is to, first of all, listen and understand the audience. And everybody's audience is going to have a slightly different take on it. We had quite a pure view of where we could take this as a whole platform, but when you start to look at how you can then apply this to different organizations, different countries, different cultures, how they can all get involved, it was important that then it can be adapted. So I think that's one of the learnings. It's looking at the initial, a bigger picture, but then tailoring the response so that it can talk to individuals and they can all understand it. So considering the subsets of audiences within there, and we saw that manifest in the fact that if you take even something as straightforward as the identity that we created, we saw that translated, we saw it, reproduced across social media. We created the assets for that, but it's turned into T-shirts. It went onto billboards in Times Square and onto a 58-floor building in China. It's still a core concept and a core idea, but being translated into different places for different audiences.
So taking it down a level, how would the team at EPAM honor Earth Hour this year? What are you doing differently yourselves? And do you have advice for folks just at home thinking about how to change their patterns, how to talk to their kids about the environment? What advice can you share based on all the work you did with WWF and all those communities?
Yeah, well, in terms of what we're doing at EPAM, the community organizing is actually kind of similar in terms of the design requirement for, Earth Hour, in the fact that we have to have kind of global activities that all of our employees can take part in, as well as kind of local activities that we can engage in our local offices. So the global activities that we're organizing are sessions and panel discussions with experts and partners. So we're in the process of putting that agenda together. But to give you an example of one of the local activities that we're thinking about, we'd like to have a screening in the London office of Patagonia's short doc, Remothering the Land. We see Patagonia as, a company that we really want to look up to in terms of the scale, global impact that they have, in addition to really activating change in their local locations. And so after the screening, what we want to do is have a bit of a discussion around how at EPAM London can really make more of a local impact.
Thank you very much for spending time talking with us about Earth Hour. How can folks participate in Earth Hour this year? What should they do to get involved?
So this year, to get involved, go and head to earthhour.com and you will find your location, and there'll be a list of opportunities and different ways for you to get involved, whether that's different events that are organized by your country's WWF team, or it's even different suggestions of how you can spend the hour, be it watching a documentary, going for a walk and spending time in nature, or even having a conversation with your family about the small changes you can make to change your behaviors for the better of our planet.
Well, Phil and Antonia, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Mitch.
All right, there we go. That was my conversation with EPAM Continuum's Phil Wilce, who is Creative Director for Europe, and Antonia Simon, who is Senior Experience Consultant at EPAM. They work together to rebrand and improve awareness of the Earth Hour event happening this year on March 23rd. And you can learn more about Earth Hour at earthhour.org. That's all one word, no space, no dash, earthhour.org, and about EPAM Continuum at epam.com. The inactive middle, which is a huge share of the global population that acknowledges and is concerned about climate change, is the key to unlocking cultural and political transformation in order to decisively turn toward a decarbonized economy that will eventually restore that climatic sweet spot in which our species evolved. In the United States, the inactive middle includes the 61% of Americans that the Pew Research Center report are concerned because they're seeing climate changes in their own communities. But we need more positive action, more dancing in the streets, as Phil put it. Earth Hour is a striking example of how communication, collective action, and global media can activate a response, an informed reaction rather than a knee-jerk reaction that leads to sustained conversation about public policy, corporate responsibility, and personal action to reduce humanity's environmental impact. So take an hour or take more time on March 23rd to turn off the lights, tune out of the fossil fuel economy, and get engaged with nature and your community to begin making changes in your lifestyle. And if you hear this podcast after March 23rd, take that hour off anyway. It's time for you, time for me, time for all of us to really get engaged with where this planet is and the condition of our environment. I also hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast or any of the more than 450 interviews that we produced on sustainability in your ear with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Writing a review, folks, on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. You are the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. So tell everyone that you know, meet them, people you meet on the street, that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or their favorite source of podcast goodness. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.